The afternoon sun was warm on his back as he stood by the grill in his backyard. The air smelled of charcoal and the sharp, sweet tang of the barbecue sauce he was carefully brushing onto the ribs. He moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a man completely at peace in his own domain. To his neighbors peeking over the fence, he was just a big, friendly guy, maybe a retired football player, now fully devoted to his family. They saw the gentle way he called his daughter over to test a piece of chicken, his deep laugh rumbling across the lawn. They didn't see the man beneath that. His name was Eli. And if you looked past the comfortable slope of his shoulders and the kind eyes, you might notice things that didn't quite add up. The way he always seemed to know exactly where everyone was in the yard without looking. How he never jumped at the sudden pop of a firecracker from down the street. His hands, large and capable, flipped the ribs with a precision that was more than just culinary skill. Earlier that day, he'd been at the grocery store. He pushed the cart with one hand, the other holding a neatly written list from his wife. He hummed an old song, stopping to carefully select peaches, checking each one for ripeness. A young mother struggling with a toddler and a full cart caught his eye. Without a word, he reached out and steadied her cart from rolling away, giving her a small, reassuring nod before moving on. He was invisible in the most ordinary way, just another black man doing the weekend shopping. But in another life, in another world, he was a ghost. Flashes of that life came to him sometimes, even here, surrounded by the safety he'd built. The smell of the grill would fade, replaced by the dry, acrid dust of a desert night. The laughter of his daughter would be replaced by the static-filled silence in his Cums headset before giving the order to move. He was a man who had commanded the most elite soldiers on the planet, making decisions in shadows that most people couldn't even imagine. He had spent years being a razor's edge, a scalpel for the nation's most delicate and dangerous problems. Now his mission was here. His kingdom was this 2-story house with a slightly overgrown lawn because he preferred playing catch with his daughter to mowing. His treasure was the woman inside, who was probably rearranging the patio table for the 3rd time, and the teenager whose latest math homework was giving them both a headache. He had traded his rifle for a barbecue tone, and he guarded this piece with the same fierce focus he once used to guard far more dangerous things. Later, after the last guest had left and the sun was dipping low, he sat on the back porch. His daughter came out, plopped down in the chair next to him, and rested her head on his broad shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies blink on in the twilight. This was the life he had fought for, the quiet he had earned. But on the other side of town, in a sterile police briefing room, his life was being sketched in a very different and dangerously wrong way. Sergeant Creed pointed at a blurry image on a screen. It was Eli's SUV, captured by a traffic camera. The vehicle matches one seen in a known narcotics corridor, Creed said, his voice confident. He clicked to another image Eli himself, coming out of a gas station. The photo made him look imposing, unsmiling. The homeowner is new to the neighborhood. Frequent, short-duration visits by multiple unidentified males, often in late-model vehicles. The visits were his old teammates. A buddy from Texas passing through for a beer. His former second-in-command bringing his family for a weekend cookout. Simple human connections. A younger officer, Brandt, leaned forward. He's a big guy. Could be intimidating. You think he's running something out of the house? Creed shrugged. In this neighborhood, it's always the quiet ones. The wife and kid might be cover. The pattern fits. We've got enough for the judge. They didn't see a father or a husband. Their bias, like a filter, turned his family's life into something suspicious. His size became a threat. His friends became accomplices. His peaceful home became a target. They wrote up the warrant request, painting a picture of a dangerous drug dealer, oblivious to the terrifying truth. The man they were about to provoke was not a criminal. He was a defender who had spent a lifetime learning how to break apart threats for a living, and who now had everything he loved waiting behind that front door dot as Eli finally stood up from the porch, giving his daughter a one-armed hug before heading inside. He had no idea that the world he'd carefully built was about to be shattered by the very people sworn to protect it. He locked the back door, a simple habit from his old life, and turned off the kitchen light, walking into the dark, quiet house completely unaware of the storm gathering just over the horizon. The first hint of dawn was just a pale light in the kitchen window. Eli stood at the counter, his large hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. The house was perfectly quiet, the kind of deep silence that comes right before the day begins. He was still for a moment, just listening. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the hall clock. It was a habit, this listening. In this peaceful place, it was just a way to appreciate the call. Then the world exploded. There was no knock. Just a sound like thunder as the front door shattered inwards, splinters of wood flying into the hallway. Heavy boots stomped on the floor. Voices, loud and angry, shouting over each other. Police! Search warrant. Get on the ground. Get on the ground now. Eli's body moved before his mind could fully catch up. Years of training took over. The cozy kitchen became a dangerous space in a heartbeat. His eyes darted to the doorway, calculating. He heard his daughter scream from upstairs, a sound of pure terror that cut through him sharper than any knife. His wife, who had been in the living room, stumbled into the kitchen doorway, her face white with shock. An officer in a black tactical vest was right behind her, his rifle pointed. Time seemed to slow down. Eli saw everything with a terrible, crystal-clear focus. The number of officers, the direction they were moving, the panic in his wife's eyes, the weapon pointed in her direction. A hot, red wave of protective fury wanted to rise up, to act, to dismantle this threat invading his home. But he saw his family. This wasn't the battlefield overseas. This was his living room. He made a choice in one smooth motion. He placed his coffee mug silently on the counter and stepped quickly, placing his own broad body directly between his wife and the officer's weapon. He raised his hands, palms open and high, but he didn't get on the ground. He stood his ground, a solid, unmovable wall in pajama pants and a t-shirt. "I am complying," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the chaos. "There is no threat here. My wife and my child are in this house." An officer, a young man with a tense face, name tag reading Brant, rushed at him. "I said on the ground." Brant shoved him hard in the chest. Eli absorbed the shove, rocking back just an inch, his feet firmly planted. He didn't shove back. He looked directly into Brant's eyes, his own gaze calm and cold, like stone. "You are in the wrong house," Eli said, each word precise. "You are frightening my family." Brant, unnerved by the man's calmness and size, grabbed Eli's arm to force him down. Eli allowed the motion, moving with it to avoid a fight, but never breaking that steady eye contact. He was cataloging it all. Brant's face, the sergeant by the door, watching, the badge numbers, the way they held their weapons. He was taken to the living room and forced to his knees. He kept his eyes on his wife, who was now crying silently on the couch, held by a female officer. He gave her a small, almost invisible nod. "I am here. It will be okay. He listened for his daughter. He heard her sobbing upstairs, an officer saying, "Stay in your room, kid." His heart ached, but his face showed nothing. The police tore his home apart. They pulled books from shelves, dumped drawers onto the floor, cut open cushions. They were loud and rough. One officer picked up a framed photo of Eli in an army dress uniform from years ago, snorted and tossed it aside. The glass cracked. Sergeant Creed, the man in charge, walked into Eli's study. He saw the shadow box on the wall. Inside were medals, but not the names of the missions. There was a folded flag, a few unit patches, and a small, simple plaque with an emblem Creed didn't recognize. It wasn't flashy. It looked like old military memorabilia. Creed walked back to the living room where Eli knelt. "A veteran, huh?" Creed said, a hint of doubt in his voice, as if the pieces weren't fitting together. Eli said nothing. He just watched Dot as the search dragged on and found nothing but a family's normal life. The energy in the house began to change. The officers' confident shouting turned to muttered commands. The frantic searching became slower, more half-hearted. They found school reports, grocery lists, family photo albums. No drugs, no weapons, no money. Brant walked over to Creed, his voice low but frantic. He resisted. He was aggressive. He didn't comply immediately. Eli heard it. The lie being born to cover the mistake. Creed looked at Eli, then at the destroyed front door, then at the family's terrified faces. His jaw tightened. He couldn't just walk away. The situation required a win. "Cuff him," Creed said, his voice tired. "Take him in. Obstruction. Resisting." As cold metal clicked around his wrists, Eli finally looked away from his wife. He looked at Sergeant Creed. It wasn't a look of anger or pleading. It was the look of a man seeing a target for the first time, understanding its shape and its weakness. It was a look of total professional assessment. He was led out in his pajamas, past his neighbors who had come out to watch. He kept his head up. He didn't speak. He was processed, photographed, and put in a cold cell. He sat on the bench, perfectly still, in the quiet. The storm of the raid was over. Now, in the silence, the real man began to work. He replayed every second, every face, every word. They thought they had just arrested a large, difficult man. They had no idea they had just caged a wolf and given him nothing left to lose but the people he loved. And there was nothing on earth more dangerous. The cell door clanged shut with a final sound that seemed to swallow all the noise that had come before. For a long time, Eli simply sat on the hard bench, his eyes closed. He wasn't sleeping. He was working. In his mind, he replayed the raid, frame by frame, like watching a security tape. He saw the officers' faces, heard the tone of their shouts, felt the point of impact from Brant's shove. He remembered the look in his daughter's eyes when he'd nodded to her, the feel of his wife's hand in his for a brief second before they took him away. The fear he had controlled for their sake now settled in his stomach, cold and heavy. But on top of it, like a layer of steel, was a calm, methodical focus. They brought him to a small, windowless room for questioning. 2 detectives sat across from him. They tried the old routines, the friendly one, the angry one. They talked about cooperating, about how things would go easier if he just admitted what they'd clearly missed in the house. Eli said almost nothing. He gave his name. He stated he was a military officer. He invoked his right to a lawyer. His voice was a flat, even river. It gave the detectives nothing, no anger to play off, no fear to exploit, no lies to trap him in. His silence was a wall. Finally, annoyed, one of them slid a phone across the table. "Make your call. To your lawyer. Then we'll see about those resisting charges." Eli picked up the phone. He didn't dial the family lawyer. His thick finger pressed the buttons for a number he knew by heart, a number that rang in an office buried deep within the Pentagon. A voice answered, clipped and professional. Secure line. Identity. Kane, Zulu 79er Alpha. His voice was low. There was a pause on the other end. Verify. What was the color of the door in Suez? Blue. Peeling paint. Lower right hinge broken. It was an old, meaningless detail from a mission a lifetime ago. A code within a code. The voice changed, becoming alert. Status, Colonel? My home was raided by local police on a wrongful warrant. I am in custody. Charges are fabricated. My family is traumatized. He stated it like a battlefield report. Facts only, no emotion. I require JAG intervention and immediate release. This is a compromised situation. Understood. Stand by. He hung up. The detectives watched him, confused. The call had been too short, too quiet. It didn't sound like a call to a lawyer. Less than an hour later, the atmosphere in the police station changed. The station captain, a man with tired eyes, came into the room. He looked at Eli, then at the detectives. "Cut him loose," he said. His voice strained. The angry detective stood up. "Sir, the charges are being reviewed by the DA's office. Process his release, now." The captain didn't look happy. He looked like a man who had just gotten a phone call from a very high, very dark place. The processing was done in silence. They handed Eli back his clothes, his wallet, his keys. The items felt alien in his hands. They led him out a side door into the late morning sun. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the free air, blinking. A plain sedan pulled up. His JAG attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in a crisp suit, got out. "I'll drive you home," she said. "We have a lot to discuss." The ride was quiet at first. Then she spoke. "The charges are dead. They'll vanish by the end of the day. The official line will be a procedural review. You're out. That's the win for now." Eli stared out the window. "It's not a win," he said quietly. "My daughter is afraid to be in her own home. My wife can't stop shaking. They broke our door. They broke our peace." He turned to look at her. "A lawsuit. It's slow, right? Years?" She nodded. "Often. And they'll fight. The system protects itself." He looked back out the window at the ordinary streets passing by. "I don't want to just sue them," he said, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. "I want to correct them." When the car pulled up to his house, he saw the front door. It was a sheet of plywood, hastily nailed over the broken frame. It looked like a wound. His wife was waiting on the porch. She ran to the car before he could even get out, throwing her arms around him, her body trembling with silent sobs. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. Over her shoulder, he saw his daughter standing in the doorway of the broken house, her arms wrapped around herself. She didn't run to him. She just watched, her eyes older than they had been that morning. Inside, the house was a disaster zone. Furniture was overturned. Drawers were still emptied, their contents scattered like leaves. A fine dust from drywall the police had punched through hung in the air. His daughter finally spoke, her voice a thin thread. "They took my laptop. They said it was evidence. They took the hard drive with all my photos." Eli felt a new kind of anger then, clean and hot. Not for himself, but for this violation of her small, sacred world. That night, after his family had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, Eli sat alone at the kitchen table. The only light came from a single bulb overhead. In front of him was a blank notepad. He picked up a pen. He began to write, not with emotion, but with the precision of a surgeon planning an operation. At the top of the page, he wrote, "Objective: restore family security and ensure accountability." Then he began to list his lines of effort, just like he would for a mission. 1. Legal: JAG lawsuit, federal civil rights complaint. 2. Evidence: doorbell camera footage. Obtain the warrant affidavit. Officer complaint histories. 3. Systemic pressure. Trigger external investigations. 4. Personal. Ensure family safety and mental well-being. He was not a victim planning revenge. He was a commander assessing an enemy stronghold and plotting its lawful, meticulous dismantling. The police had seen a big man they could push around. They didn't see the mind that had organized raids on mountain fortresses and hostage rescues in crowded cities. They had awakened that mind, and now it was focused entirely on them. They had wanted a fight in the moment, with shouts and handcuffs. They were going to get a campaign conducted in courtrooms and quiet offices, and they would never see him coming until it was too late. He put down the pen, turned off the light, and sat in the dark, watching the moon cast a glow on the plywood front door. The battle for his home had begun. The first week after the raid was a quiet, painful time in the house. The plywood door was replaced with a new, stronger one, but the memory of the broken frame lingered. Eli moved through the rooms, picking up pieces of their life. He found a shattered ceramic mug his daughter had made in 3rd grade. He carefully glued it back together, the cracks remaining as thin, white lines. It was a small act, but it felt important. They had to rebuild, piece by piece. His wife, usually the talker of the family, was quiet. She jumped at the sound of a car door slamming outside. His daughter spent most of her time in her room, the music she used to love now silent. Eli watched them, and the cold, hard center of his resolve grew stronger. He began his work in the study, the door closed. His tools were not weapons, but a laptop, a phone, and a meticulous mind. His first move was to call his old friend, the one from Army Intelligence, who now worked in cybersecurity. "I need a shadow," Eli said, skipping any hello. "What kind?" The friend asked, his voice serious. "A legal one. I'm going to be followed. I want to know every time, and I want it recorded, cleanly, by the book." The next day, Eli did something simple. He drove to the public library. He parked and went inside, spending an hour looking at books on local history. As he'd suspected, an unmarked police sedan sat in the lot across the street. Officer Brandt was behind the wheel, slouched down, trying to look casual. What Brandt didn't see was the man in a delivery van parked 3 spaces down, a small, powerful camera lens pointed at his license plate and his face. This happened again at the grocery store, at the hardware store. Every time Eli left his house, Brandt or another officer from the raid was there, watching. They were trying to intimidate him, to catch him in a mistake, to prove their failed raid had been right all along. Each time they were documented. The photos, the timestamps, the locations were all compiled into a neat digital folder. Eli's next visit was to a small, nondescript office building in the city. He met with his JAG attorney and a serious-looking man in a suit from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Eli didn't shout or demand. He presented. He showed the doorbell camera footage from the raid, which showed the officers rushing in without announcement. He provided the perfectly normal receipts from the hardware store that the warrant had, mistakenly labeled as suspicious purchases. He gave them the list of his friends who had visited, all with their full names, ranks, and service numbers. "This warrant," Eli said calmly, pointing to a copy, was built on a lie. The officer who wrote it, Sergeant Creed, had a pattern. He slid another file across the table. It was a list of other complaints against Creed and Brandt for excessive force, for wrongful stops. All had been investigated internally and dismissed. The system they work for failed to correct them. Now they have traumatized my family. I am asking you to do what that system would not. The man from the DOJ took the files. "This is remarkably thorough, Colonel." "I believe in thorough," Eli replied. The pressure began to build, but from the inside. The police chief started getting calls from the city council, asking pointed questions about no-knock warrant policies. Internal Affairs, which had always been a friend to officers like Creed, suddenly received a formal, airtight complaint from a United States Army colonel, rooted through the Pentagon. It couldn't be ignored or filed away. One afternoon, Sergeant Creed was called into the captain's office. The captain didn't look at him. The warrant affidavit for the Kane raid. The confidential informant you cited. Yes, sir? Creed said, his chest tight. The DA's office tried to contact him for follow-up. He doesn't exist. The phone number is disconnected. The description doesn't match anyone in our files. The captain finally looked up, his eyes weary and furious. You fabricated a source, Creed. You lied to a judge. Sir, I had reason to believe you have been suspended. Effective immediately. Turn in your badge and your gun. And for God's sake, get a lawyer. Creed stood in the parking lot later, feeling the strange lightness of his belt without his weapon. He saw Brandt leaning against a car, panicked. What do we do? Brandt asked, his voice shaky. Creed looked across town toward the quiet neighborhood where Eli Kane lived. A cold understanding was dawning on him. This wasn't bad luck. This was a targeted, precise dismantling. Kane hadn't yelled or threatened. He had simply, quietly, taken apart the foundation of their careers, brick by brick, using their own rules against them at home. Eli sat with his daughter at the kitchen table. She was trying to do her homework, but she kept staring into space. It's hard to focus, huh? He said gently. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I keep hearing the door break. Eli pushed his own work aside. Me too, he said honestly. You know what we're going to do? We're going to learn how to fix things. That weekend, he didn't work on his campaign. He and his daughter worked on an old bicycle from the garage. He showed her how to take the chain off, clean it, and put it back on. She got grease on her hands, and for the first time in weeks, a small smile on her face. He was fighting his war in courtrooms and offices, but this, here in the garage, was the heart of it. He was rebuilding trust, the same way he was rebuilding their sense of safety, one careful, deliberate piece at a time. The officers, now scared and confused, were watching the shadow of the man they had provoked. But the man himself was right here, teaching his daughter about bicycles, waiting patiently for the next legal move in a battle they had already lost. The morning of the hearing felt different. It wasn't held in a criminal court, but in a civil one, a room of wood panels and quiet murmurs, where the battle would be fought with words and paper, not weapons. Eli dressed not in a suit, but in his Army service uniform. The dark green fabric was crisp, the ribbons over his heart a mosaic of colors, each representing a story of sacrifice and service. He didn't say it was for the judge or the jury. He did it for his family and for the officers sitting across the room, so they would finally see exactly who they had chosen to target. His wife held his hand tightly as they walked in. His daughter walked just behind, her head high, looking at the officers who had raided their home. Brandt, now looking pale and much younger without his uniform, refused to meet her gaze. Creed sat stiffly beside his lawyer, his eyes fixed straight ahead, seeing nothing. The lawsuit was simple: a violation of their civil rights, emotional distress, the destruction of their home. Eli's attorney laid out the facts, clean and cold. The doorbell footage played on a screen. The room watched the violent, chaotic entry, the shouting, the fear on his family's faces. They saw Eli, a large man in pajamas, placing himself as a shield, speaking with a calm that now seemed profound. Then, it was Eli's turn to take the stand. He walked slowly, his posture perfect, the uniform seeming to fill the space with a quiet authority. He took the oath, his voice clear. For a long moment, He just looked at the jury, ordinary people from the community. His attorney began. "Can you describe what you were doing the morning of the raid?" "I was making coffee," Eli said. "My daughter was asleep upstairs. My wife was reading in the living room. It was a quiet morning." He described the sound of the door breaking, the storm of noise and bodies. He spoke not with dramatic flair, but with the plain, awful truth of it. He told them about the cracked photo frame, the sobs from upstairs, the feel of the cuffs. "And your military service?" his attorney asked gently. "Did you inform the officers of your rank?" I stated I was a military officer. It did not change their actions. He paused, looking now directly at Creed and Brandt. "In the service, we have something called the law of armed conflict. It governs how we treat even our enemies. It requires proportionality, distinction, humanity." His voice grew softer, more devastating. "I came home expecting those same principles from the people sworn to protect my community. I did not receive them. My family received fear." The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination, trying to poke holes. He asked if Eli had been confrontational. "My only confrontation," Eli replied, his eyes steady, "was standing between a loaded weapon and my wife." "Would you not do the same?" The attorney shifted, asking about the visits from his friends that had sparked suspicion. "They are my brothers," Eli said simply. "We served together. We check on each other. Is fellowship now a crime?" The question hung in the air, exposing the absurd, biased heart of the accusation. When the defense had nothing left, the trial moved to its end. The jury was not out for long. The verdict was for the family on every count. The judge, a stern older woman, looked at the officers as she confirmed the verdict. Then she spoke directly about the egregious abuse of authority and the cowardice of the cover-up. Afterwards, in the hallway, there was no celebration. There was relief, heavy and deep. The financial settlement was large, but it felt like ashes. What Eli wanted was the public admission of wrongdoing, and he had gotten it. The police department, facing the undeniable truth and the fury of the DOJ, had already settled. A public statement acknowledged the grave error and the systemic failures. Creed and Brandt were stripped of their badges. Criminal charges for falsifying the warrant were pending. They walked out of the courthouse ahead of Eli into a gauntlet of reporters. Creed stopped, turning to look back. His eyes met Eli's across the crowded hallway. He seemed to be searching for something: anger, triumph, gloating. He found none. He saw only the same calm, assessing look from the morning of the raid, now tinged with a final, quiet certainty. The message was clear. "You brought this on yourselves." Creed turned and disappeared into the sunlight, a broken man. A few weeks later, autumn was turning the leaves. Eli stood once more at his front door, the new one, solid and painted. A news van was packing up down the street, the story already growing old for them. He watched as his daughter rode her repaired bicycle in slow circles in the driveway, the chain clicking smoothly. His wife came out and stood beside him, slipping her hand into his. Her hand didn't shake anymore. "It's over," she whispered. Not quite a question. "The fight is," he said, squeezing her hand. "The work isn't." He knew the scars were still there, in all of them. Healing would be its own long campaign. He looked at his daughter, laughing now as she nearly wobbled over, and at his wife, her face finally relaxed. The institution had been forced to correct its course. The men who had wronged them were gone. The commander's objective was secured. He turned and walked back inside his home, closing the door softly behind him. The lock clicked, a normal, gentle sound. He was not just a soldier anymore, or a victim, or a plaintiff. He was a father, a husband, a man who had defended his home with the only weapon that mattered in the end, an unshakable belief in justice, and the steady courage to see it through. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, the peace, hard-won and fragile, had finally returned.